Hello everyone, Steven here from Redolessence with another fragrance review. And this time we have a fragrance from the house of Nasomatto, and the fragrance is called Absinth. Now Absinth is a fragrance that was released in 2007, that's the year it was introduced, and the perfumer for this fragrance is of course the mastermind, the composer behind every other fragrance from the Nasomatto house or part of that line, and that is none other than Alessandro Gaultieri. Now this is a fragrance that's also part of the Nasomatto project. What is the Nasomatto project exactly? I look at it as a theme of sorts. So you have a few different fragrances that are either meant to evoke a different feeling or accentuate a different characteristic of human behavior, if I can put it that way. So of course you have the heavy hitter, the fan favorite Black Afghano, which is made to evoke the feelings of temporary bliss, very dark, very mysterious. You have Duro, which is bold and potent, and that one is meant to enhance all of the manifestations of male strength. And then of course now you have Absinth, and Absinth was released at the same time of its counterparts that I just mentioned. But Absinth is a quest to stimulate irresponsible behavior, and it's meant to evoke different degrees of hysteria. So why spray a fragrance on you that's meant to encourage maniacal behavior or stimulate it for that matter? And I think that may come across a bit confusing if the context isn't there, is not present. And I think one should know prior to purchasing or even trying out this fragrance that it was inspired by an alcoholic drink called absinthe. So this one is eponymously named. But absinthe is a spirit. It's not a liqueur, as many people erroneously categorize it under, because it's not bottled with added sugar. So it's a spirit that could come across a little bit of as being a little sweet just because it is fermented with aniseed and sweet fennel seed. But it is one that's predominantly fermented with wormwood. Now, as the name implies, it is not a wood, it's actually an herb. And what happens is, since the drink's introduction in the late 1700s, people were taking it in an effort to hallucinate. People were taking it because they wanted to have an out-of-body experience. And that's because wormwood contains a chemical compound that the drink acquires after its fermentation called thujone. And thujone has not only psychoactive effects, but it has convulsive properties as well. So people who took thujone, or who took wormwood, which contains thujone, were not only hallucinating, but they were having convulsions as a result of that as well. So of course it was banned in 1915 in the United States, and since the recent change of food and drink laws in Europe, the United States decided to reevaluate the drink, reanalyze it, and see what could possibly be done to reintroduce this drink, to re-legalize it, but not allow people to hallucinate over it. So of course thujone levels were drastically decreased, and it was reintroduced in 2007. Now the worst thing that could happen if you drink it is you might get drunk. Worst case scenario, you get your stomach pumped, but you don't hallucinate on it anymore. And I think that serves as a bit of consistency, because not only was the drink re-legalized in 2007, but this fragrance was released in 2007. So Alessandro Gaultieri could have known very well what he was doing when he released this fragrance. Not only that, but it could serve as an homage to the drink. There are certainly a number of fragrances on the market which are absinthe inspired. This could very well be one of them. Now, I haven't tried other absinthe inspired fragrances. I haven't even tried the drink absinthe. So in terms of it smelling like the drink that it was eponymously named after, I can't validate that. But what I can say is that it is a unique smell, very grassy, very herbal. Unique is the best way to put it. So with that being said, let's move on to the presentation for Nasomatto's Absinth. Here we have the presentation for Absinth by Nasomatto. First up we have the box, and as you can tell there's a nice creative little design here written on the front and the side. It is a little sketchy, but you do have the name of the fragrance written a few times in a cursive typeset. When you flip it over, you get a little bit of, and I apologize for the condition of my box, but you get a little bit of a description on the Nasomatto project itself. Now this is a very thin cardboard sleeve, and it comes off to reveal a nice padded cushion on the inside with the silhouette of the bottle carved into it. So it fits into place very securely, and that keeps it from moving around too much, as you can tell. Now they've also included a little travel cap with Nasomatto engraved in it. So if you don't want to carry around the bulky cap when you're bringing it with you or whatever, you don't have to. Here we have the bottle, and it's your standard Nasomatto bottle. We have the name of the fragrance written in the front, name of the house written on the side with the concentration, the size 30 milliliter, 1 ounce. That's the only size available for 165 American dollars. You have a beautiful wooden cap. And as you can tell on the inside, there's a plastic insert that allows it to click into place very securely, and you can pick up the bottle from the cap. There's no fear of it coming apart, and the atomizer works fairly well given its concentration. I'm not spraying it, it's pricey juice. So that was the presentation for Nasomatto's Absinth. Now, as far as the smell goes for Nasomatto's Absinth, this is a unique smell. It's very hard for me, or I should say was very hard for me to wrap my nose around this one. Just because, as you probably may or may not know, Alessandro Gaultieri does not disclose the notes listed in his fragrances, just because he doesn't want to take away from the individual interpretation of his fragrances. So it's very hard for me to kind of wrap my head around what the smells I'm smelling in this fragrance are, just because I haven't smelled too many other fragrances that utilize them. And I'm sure that one of them is the wormwood, of course. Now, I can say that in the opening, this fragrance smells bright and sharp. Those are two words that I think describe this fragrance perfectly. It's very bright and it's sharp. Now, it's not sharp in a harsh, offensive or cloying type of way. The best way that I think I can describe it is take Luca Turin's theory of vibrational theory of olfaction. So just assume for the purposes of this review that it's true. So accept that premise and say that there are different types of waveform. Each one allows humans to interpret a different smell. So you have ones that undulate or fluctuate very quickly. You have ones that are a little bit smoother. Now you also have waveforms that have a very rapid or a harsh incline and decline, and then you have ones that are a little more rounded out. Now, the best way that I can describe this fragrance is that the waveform is consists of very sharp inclines and declines in its waveform and very rapid undulations, so that when you imagine this waveform entering your nasal cavity and just brushing up against your olfactory receptors, it's enough to kind of make you move your head away from wherever it is you're smelling the fragrance off of. But that's only done because it sort of catches you off guard. It's not offensive. It's not something that's going to choke you out where you're like, I don't really want to smell this fragrance anymore. It intrigues you. It's very intriguing. And it's inspiring at the same time. It makes you want to smell it again. Just because there's something so creative and unique going on in this fragrance. And I'm sure that sharpness is attributed to the wormwood. But again, I have not smelled that note individually. I have not smelled wormwood essential oil. So it's very hard for me to kind of wrap my head around what that note smells like in its individuality. But there is certainly an absinthe accord in this fragrance. Now, it's not an absinthe note because it's a series or a bunch of different notes working together to give off that impression. Now, another note that is used in the fermentation of the drink absinthe is fennel, or fennel seed to be precise. And I have used fennel seed in my own cooking and still do, so I'm very familiar with that smell. And I think that contributes to its very slight peppery quality in the opening. There very well could be pepper in this fragrance, but it just doesn't come across that strong. I would say that in this fragrance, it has more of a culinary vibe. So of course, if you're familiar with the oregano used in Interlude Band by Amouage, it kind of has a feel like that to it. I would be inclined to say basil, but I don't think it smells leafy. It smells more herbal, more culinary, like more of a spice type of opening. So I'm definitely getting the wormwood, I'm getting fennel seed, maybe possibly a little bit of oregano, and there's a mild chance that there might be pepper in there as well. Now, I do get a bit of vetiver as well, and I would be inclined to say that it constitutes a base note in this fragrance, but it's a fairly linear smell from what I'm getting. What I spray in the initial application is pretty much what I'm going to smell in the base. It doesn't change too much. There isn't too much of a scent development, with the exception of those spices in the opening kind of evaporating. And that, I would say, that happens in the first hour to hour and a half of application of this fragrance. And it doesn't have the best longevity, but I digress. But this is a fragrance that it opens up a bit spicy. It has an earthy undertone, and I think a fellow or a reviewer on an online fragrance forum put it very well when he said that this kind of reminds him of a forest after it's just finished raining. And I do have to agree with that. It does certainly have a wet or like a dewy, moist quality to it. Not necessarily grassy in that sense, although vetiver is a type of grass, but it's almost mossy. I can imagine like moss that has just absorbed a lot of water or retained a lot of water from a fresh rain shower. That's kind of the qualities that I get out of this fragrance, is that it has a very dewy, very moist type of characteristic, but at the same time, it's earthy, it's herbal, and it's grassy. I think that's the best way that I can put it, with maybe a few blonde woods in the base as well, contributing to that linearity that I perceive, again, with the exception of the spices in the opening. So with that being said, let's move on to the rating for Nasomatto's Absinth. Now, as far as the rating goes for Nasomatto's Absinth, first up we have uniqueness, and I gave this fragrance an 8 out of 10. Like I said, it is fairly linear to my nose with the exception of the spices in the opening, and I think if it weren't for that, it definitely would be a non-linear fragrance. I think this one does come across smelling a bit linear, not much of a scent development, but I do have to say that there are other absinthe-inspired fragrances on the market, and I have to admit that I haven't gotten my nose around any of them. So until I do, I may revisit this one and change the grade, but for the time being, it is unique for the most part, being in the sense that there are not, too many other fragrances in my collection that I could compare this to. Maybe there are only one or two, but I do not want to offer them as comparisons because I do not want to take away your perception of this fragrance. It is one that's very worth at least getting a sample of. So I give it an 8 out of 10 for uniqueness. Next up we have longevity, and I got a good, I would say 8 hours on my skin for this fragrance, which I think is below average given its concentration. This is an Extrait de Parfum concentration, so you're looking at about 30% essential oils. So I expected this one to perform a bit better than it did. Generally, 8 hours is excellent longevity. I gave it an 8 out of 10 for longevity, but I think being that it is an Extrait de Parfum concentration, its presentation is a little bit below average, but still projects pretty well, generally speaking. Lasts very well, I meant to say. Next up, we do have projection though, and for projection, I gave this fragrance 7 out of 10. This one projects loudly, I would say, for the first 2.5 to 3 hours of application, and I think that's only because those spices are still lingering. Until they evaporate, this one projects very loudly, and being that there is less alcohol in here, of course the alcohol is the contributing factor to the projection. The more alcohol you have, the more loudly it projects for a short period of time. You take away the alcohol, it doesn't project as loudly, but for a longer period of time. And I expected this one to project for at least 4 to 5 hours. I got 3, so I would say that that is a little below average again of performance, but for the most part, it projects fairly well. It gives you a nice scent cloud, I would say, in the first 3 hours or so, but I do put on maybe 4 sprays and 1 definitely to the shirt. Just make sure you're not wearing a light colored shirt because it might stain it. But I gave this a 7 out of 10 for projection. Next up we have versatility, and I gave this fragrance an 8 out of 10. Absinthe is a versatile fragrance in the sense that it could be worn on a number of different social scenarios. It could be worn casually, it could be worn in semi-formal occasions because it has a touch of sophistication to it, and then of course it could be worn for formal occasions as well. It is also an all 4 seasons type of fragrance. This one could be worn in the hotter months because of that dewy herbal quality that it has going on to it. It's definitely reminiscent or evocative of the spring and the summer seasons. It could also be worn in the colder weather just because of the spicy opening. So I think that this one is a very versatile fragrance given the temperature that it's worn in. The only thing that I have to say about this fragrance is that I don't think it's very unisex. It is marketed as a unisex fragrance. I think this leans more in the direction of being a masculine fragrance, but to each his own, or in this case her own. Wear whatever makes you happy, but I think this is generally a masculine fragrance. So I gave it an 8 out of 10 for versatility. And last up we have presentation. We already tackled that. You know how I feel about Nasomatto's presentations. It's not necessarily stylish, but it is classic, elegant, simplistic, refined, just the way that I like it. I give this a 10 out of 10 for its presentation, and then that brings this fragrance to an overall rating of 41 out of 50. So there you have it, That was my presentation for Nasomatto's Absinth. As always, please don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. Once again, this has been Steven with another fragrance review from Redolessence, and thanks for watching.